In the last step, we talked about profiles. Profiles enable you to have different configuration for different environments. In this step, let's look at how you can set up complex configuration for your application. Let's say I have a currency service that I am talking to, and I would want to configure a lot of values for it. Currency service.url, let's say currency service.username, and I would want to be able to configure a currency service.key. In addition, let's say there is a lot of other configuration I would want for different other services as well. How does Spring Boot help us manage this application configuration? How can I define a property value in here and make use of it in a Spring Boot application? If you want to create a lot of application configuration for your application, then the recommended approach in Spring Boot is to use something called configuration properties. Let's go ahead and create a class. I'll call this currency service configuration. Now, what are the things I would want to define in here? Let's go in here. These are the values which I would want to define. So let's see how to define these in here. The first thing you need to do is to add an annotation called configuration properties. So let's do a control1 or command1 and import it in. And what is the prefix that we would want to use? It's currency service. So for all the values, I would want to use the same prefix. So if you do a control space or command space, you can see a prefix in here. And you can configure currency service as the prefix. And what are the properties that you would want to have? Private string URL, private string, let's get this right, string username, and private string key. So these are the three attributes we'd want to store for currency conversion configuration. Let's go ahead and generate constructors and setters. Right click source, generate getters and setters, and generate getters and generate getters and setters for all these. So let's do a generate, and let's format the code, Control Shift F or Command Shift F. And now the prefix is defined, currency service. All our properties are defined. And in addition, we need to add at component. We would want Spring to manage this. That's the reason why we are adding in at component. So let's organize imports. You can see that org Spring Framework stereotype component is imported in. Now your application is ready. Your application understands the configuration properties and these. Where do you configure this? You can configure these in your application.properties. For now, I'll say http://default.in28minutes.com, and I'll call this default username and default key. Now your application.properties has these properties configured, and we have currency service configuration, which is mapped to the properties which is present in here. Now we would want to see if our code is working, if the mapping from application properties to the currency conversion to the currency service configuration is working. And one of the approaches to quickly look at it is to create a simple controller. So I'll copy course controller, Control C, Control V, and I'll call this currency configuration controller. I'll open up the currency configuration controller, and over here we'd want to actually return currency configuration back, and this would not be returning list of this would be returning configuration. This will be returning currency service configuration, and I would want to be able to get an instance of this currency service configuration which is created by Spring. So we are saying at component in here, so Spring would create an instance of it. So what I can do in here is to auto wire it in. So I can say at auto wired and private currency service configuration. So we are auto wiring the bean which is created in here. Spring would create this bean. We are taking it up and we are auto configuring it in here. And all that we need to do now is to return it as a response for our simple service that we are creating in here. This will help us to look at the values which are configured right now. So let's save this. And if you go over and type in, instead of courses, currency configuration, we need to have a single slash. So localhost 8080 currency configuration, press enter. You can see that these values which we configured in application.properties are coming up. Default.in28minutes.com, default username, default key. Now let's go in here. Let's change the properties to just say default 1 and save it. Give the application a little bit of time to restart and pick it up and refresh. You can see that the values are coming in from application.properties. Right now you can see that the active profile is dev, and we are not overriding these properties in the dev profile. So we are making use of the default properties which are configured in here. However, let's say I would want to make use of different properties in the dev profile. How can I do that? I can go to application dev.properties and I can configure it in here. I can go in here and say this is dev.in28minutes.com and this is the dev username and this is the dev key. So what we are doing is we are configuring different values in the dev environment. Let's save this. And if you go and refresh, you can see that the values are now coming in from the dev environment. So if you have complex application configuration like this to create, in those kind of situations, you can make use of configuration properties. Configuration properties is very, very easy to use. All that you need to do is to create a Spring component and annotate it with configuration properties. You can have as many properties as you would want in here. I've seen applications which have hundreds of properties which are defined in here, and this would act as the centralized class for all the application related configuration. So a combination of configuration properties and profiles in Spring Boot is very, very powerful. It enables you to externalize all the configuration that is needed for your application. In this step, we talked about configuration properties and profiles. I'm sure you're having a wonderful time, and I'll see you in the next step.